Your doctor tested your cholesterol last year. Probably your blood pressure too. Maybe your blood sugar. You got the numbers back. They were in range or close enough, and the appointment ended with either a reassuring nod or a prescription. You left with a sense that your health had been assessed, that the important things had been measured, that if something was seriously wrong, it would have showed up in the numbers. I want to tell you about a number that was not in that panel. A number that the research says is a stronger predictor of how long you will live than every single marker your doctor did test. A number that, when researchers look at data from 122,000 patients and rank every known risk factor for all-cause mortality, sits at the top of the list. More predictive than smoking status, more predictive than diabetes, more predictive than hypertension, more predictive than the cholesterol number your doctor spent the most time discussing with you. That number is your VO2 Max, and there is an overwhelming probability that you have never had it measured. This is the most important biomarker in preventive medicine that the medical system has almost entirely failed to incorporate into routine clinical practice. Not because the evidence is weak. The evidence is among the strongest in all of medicine. Not because measuring it is impossible. It can be estimated with reasonable accuracy from a smartwatch and measured precisely in a clinical setting in under 30 minutes. But because the system you are relying on to tell you what matters for your health has built its infrastructure around a set of biomarkers that were established decades ago, when the exercise science and cardiology communities had not yet produced the quality of evidence that exists today. And in that lag, between what the research says and what the medical system routinely measures, people are walking around with the most dangerous risk factor for premature death that exists, completely unaware of it, because nobody in their healthcare system has ever told them it matters. Let me give you the data first, because without the data, nothing else I am going to tell you carries the weight it deserves. In 2018, researchers at the Cleveland Clinic published a study in JAMA Network Open that remains one of the most important papers in the history of preventive cardiology. They analyzed 122,007 patients who had undergone exercise treadmill testing, a dataset of extraordinary size and quality, and examined the relationship between their measured cardiorespiratory fitness and their long-term all-cause mortality. The findings were decisive in a way that research findings rarely are. The mortality risk associated with being in the lowest fitness category, compared to the highest, was not modestly elevated. It was not somewhat concerning. It was catastrophic. Elite performers, those in the top tier of cardiorespiratory fitness for their age and sex, had an 80% reduction in mortality risk compared to those in the lowest fitness group. An 80% reduction. And critically, the researchers found no upper limit to the benefit. There was no point on the fitness curve where getting fitter stopped producing survival benefit. The line kept moving in one direction: better fitness, lower mortality, without any observed ceiling. This finding was not an isolated result from a single study. The 2022 data from Kokkinos and colleagues, analyzing over 750,000 United States veterans, the largest cardiorespiratory fitness dataset ever assembled, found that each 1 MET increase in measured fitness was associated with a 13 to 15% reduction in all-cause mortality risk, regardless of age, sex, body mass index, or existing health conditions. Every step up the fitness ladder counted, for everyone, at every age. No group was too old or too sick to benefit from measurable improvements in cardiorespiratory fitness. The Copenhagen Male Study, which followed 5,107 men for 46 years, one of the longest prospective cohort studies in exercise science, found that men in the highest cardiorespiratory fitness category had approximately 5 years longer life expectancy than those in the lowest category, even after fully adjusting for every confounding factor the researchers could measure. And the JAC paper that analyzed this data found something even more specific and more actionable. Each 1 unit increase in VO2 max was associated with a 45-day increase in lifespan. Not approximately. The 95% confidence interval ran from 30 to 61 days per unit increase. More fitness, more life. The relationship was clear, consistent, and without a point at which it reversed. Now I want to put the magnitude of this effect into context, because the numbers alone do not fully communicate what they mean. The standard risk factors that your doctor tests for, manages, and prescribes medications to address elevated LDL cholesterol, hypertension, diabetes, smoking, are all genuinely real risk factors. The evidence connecting them to cardiovascular disease and premature death is solid, and the clinical management of these conditions has genuinely improved population health outcomes. I am not suggesting you ignore them, but the effect sizes. Consider this carefully. A 2018 scientific review named VO2 Max, the strongest predictor of life expectancy among all traditional health indicators. When researchers put every measurable risk factor into the same model and ranked their predictive power for long-term mortality, cardiorespiratory fitness, your VO2 Max, came out on top. Not tied for top. Not slightly better than cholesterol. On top. The research says, unambiguously, that being in the lowest fitness category carries approximately the same mortality risk as being a smoker. And the research also says, unambiguously, that being in the highest fitness category produces a mortality benefit that no pharmaceutical intervention currently available can match. Think about that second point for a moment. No drug, no supplement, no medical procedure produces a mortality benefit of the magnitude that a change from low to high cardiorespiratory fitness produces. The best cardiovascular medications, statins, antihypertensives, the GLP-1s in their most favorable trial results, produce meaningful mortality risk reductions in specific high-risk populations. Nothing produces an 80% reduction in all-cause mortality. Nothing else in medicine has that effect size. The most powerful preventive intervention available to human beings is free, generates no side effects, requires no prescription, and has not been utilized to a fraction of its potential because the healthcare system has not built the infrastructure to make it visible, measurable, or actionable in routine clinical care. Let me give you the healthcare system critique directly, because it is not a conspiracy and it is not incompetence. It is a structural problem with real causes and real consequences. The biomarkers that dominate routine clinical practice, cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar, became standard because they were measurable with the technology and clinical infrastructure available when they were established as standards. A blood draw, a pressure cuff, a glucometer. Simple, cheap, scalable. The pharmaceutical industry built treatment categories around them. Insurance reimbursement structures developed around them. Medical school curricula were built around managing them. The entire infrastructure of preventive cardiology calcified around a set of measurements that were selected for their accessibility rather than for their predictive power. VO2 Max testing in its gold standard form, having a patient breathe through a mask connected to a metabolic analyzer while running on a treadmill at increasing intensity, is more complex than a blood draw. It requires equipment, trained staff, and approximately 30 minutes of clinical time. Insurance companies, operating on cost frameworks established before the longevity medicine literature reached its current quality, do not routinely reimburse it as preventive care. Physicians receive minimal training on exercise prescription, on how to interpret VO2 Max results, or on how to communicate fitness as a modifiable risk factor with the same gravity that they communicate cholesterol or blood pressure. The American Heart Association recognized this problem in 2016 and published an official scientific statement advocating that cardiorespiratory fitness be categorized as a clinical vital sign and routinely assessed as part of clinical practice. The AHA called low CRF a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality. That statement was published 10 years ago. The integration into routine clinical practice has been, to put it charitably, incomplete. The gap between what the evidence says should be measured and what your doctor actually measures during your annual physical has not substantially closed in the decade since the world's most authoritative cardiovascular organization said it should. The result is millions of people who appear healthy by conventional metrics: normal cholesterol, normal blood pressure, unremarkable fasting glucose, whose cardiorespiratory fitness is in the lowest or second lowest quintile for their age, whose actual mortality risk is dramatically elevated, and who have no idea. Not because they are careless about their health, because the system that is supposed to tell them what matters has not updated to the evidence. Now let me tell you what VO2 Max actually is, physiologically, so that the rest of what I am going to tell you about why it matters makes complete mechanistic sense. VO2 max, maximal oxygen uptake, is the maximum rate at which your body can consume oxygen during maximal intensity exercise. It is expressed in milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. It is the gold standard measure of cardiorespiratory fitness because it captures the integrated function of every system in the body that participates in oxygen delivery and utilization. The heart's ability to pump blood, the lungs' ability to exchange gas, the blood's oxygen-carrying capacity, the muscles' ability to extract and use the delivered oxygen. A person with a high VO2 max has a cardiovascular and metabolic system that can sustain high-intensity effort because every link in the oxygen delivery chain is operating efficiently. A person with a low VO2 max has a system in which one or more of those links is limiting. The heart's stroke volume is inadequate, or the muscle's mitochondrial density is insufficient to extract the oxygen the blood is delivering, or the vascular architecture of the working muscles is insufficiently developed to distribute blood flow appropriately. VO2 max is not a single measurement of a single organ. It is the integrated performance score of the entire aerobic system. What makes it such a powerful predictor of mortality is precisely this integrative nature. A normal cholesterol reading tells you about one specific biological marker in one specific physiological pathway. A normal VO2 max tells you that your heart is pumping effectively, your lungs are exchanging gas efficiently, your vascular system is delivering blood appropriately, your muscles are metabolically capable, and your entire system can sustain the kind of physiological stress that real life and the chronic stresses of aging, illness, and acute events will impose. It is a comprehensive biological audit in a single number. And when VO2 max is low, when the audit reveals a system that is functioning below the minimum threshold for metabolic and cardiovascular resilience, the consequences are not limited to reduced exercise tolerance. The same mitochondrial dysfunction and vascular insufficiency that limits exercise performance is operating all the time, in every cell, in every organ, driving the chronic inflammation, the metabolic dysregulation, and the cellular aging that produce cardiovascular disease, cancer, cognitive decline, and virtually every other age-related condition that ends human lives prematurely. Low cardiorespiratory fitness is not a fitness problem. It is a systemic biological problem that happens to be most easily visible and measurable as a fitness problem. Now I need to tell you about the decline trajectory, because this is where the urgency of the situation becomes completely clear for people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. VO2 max peaks in the mid-20s and then begins a progressive decline. After age 30, the average rate of decline is approximately 3 to 6% per decade. This sounds manageable, and in the early years it is. A 35-year-old with a VO2 max of 45 ml/min, who has lost 5% since their peak, still has a VO2 max of roughly 43, still respectable, still safe by clinical standards. But the decline does not stay linear. After age 50, the decline in sedentary individuals accelerates to approximately 15% per decade or more. And after age 70, the rate can exceed 20% per decade. The compound effect of these accelerating losses is dramatic. The 35-year-old who is coasting on their modest fitness level without deliberate maintenance will, by their mid-60s, have lost enough cardiorespiratory capacity that they are approaching or crossing the clinical thresholds below which independent function becomes compromised. Here is the statistic that I want you to hold on to. Studies estimate that 50 to 70% of the age-related decline in VO2 max is attributable to inactivity rather than biological aging. The biology sets the slope. The behavior determines how steep that slope actually becomes. For most people, most of the VO2 max they will lose over the next 3 decades is not being taken from them by biology. They are losing it through choices, through training insufficiency, through the gradual substitution of more sedentary modes of life for active ones, through the perfectly understandable human tendency to reduce the most effortful activities, first when time and energy become scarce. The implications for the window of opportunity are specific. The training you do in your 30s and 40s does not just benefit you now. It sets the fitness foundation from which the unavoidable losses of the 50s and 60s will be subtracted. The person who enters their 50s with a VO2 max of 50 and loses 15% per decade will be at 43 by their early 60s and 36 by their early 70s, still in the range of functional capacity and cardiovascular health. The person who enters their 50s with a VO2 max of 30 and loses 15% per decade will be at 25 by their early 60s and 21 by their early 70s, in the range associated with severely compromised functional capacity, dramatically elevated mortality risk, and the kind of physiological fragility that makes every acute illness and every physical demand of daily life a potentially serious event. The gap between these two trajectories is not closed by medication. It is not closed by surgery. It is not closed by supplements. It is closed by training. Specifically, by the training you do or do not do in the decades before the steepest part of the decline arrives. The dementia data adds a dimension to this that is even more alarming and even more actionable. High-fit individuals show 36 to 88% lower risk of cognitive decline compared to their unfit peers across multiple large cohort studies. Each one, MET increase in fitness translates to approximately a 16% reduction in dementia incidence, with a dose-response relationship and no observed ceiling effect. A sedentary individual who improves from the lowest to the highest fitness quintile could theoretically delay dementia onset by 5 to 9.5 years. 5 to 9.5 years. The largest pharmaceutical trials for Alzheimer's prevention, the ones that have attracted billions in investment and years of research effort, have failed to produce anything close to that effect size. The most effective dementia prevention intervention available to human beings is improving their VO2 max, and it is free. Now let me tell you what to do about it. The first step is measurement. Not the estimate your wearable gives you, not because it is useless, but because the estimate is a starting point and the precision of actual measurement is worth having if you are serious about tracking progress and assessing risk. Wearable-based VO2 max estimates are generated from heart rate data and algorithmic models that have meaningful individual error ranges. For establishing a baseline and for population-level trending, they have value. For clinical decision-making and precise progress tracking, they are a proxy. If you have access to a clinic with metabolic testing capability, a VO2 max test using a mask and metabolic analyzer on a treadmill or cycle ergometer, get it done. The test takes about 30 minutes, is safe for the vast majority of healthy adults, and produces data that is worth more than any blood panel you have had in the last 5 years, for the specific question of how long you are going to live and how functional you are going to be while doing it. Once you have your number, evaluate it against age and sex normative data. The clinical categories, below average, average, above average, good, excellent, superior, elite, are established from large population datasets and give you a precise location on the fitness mortality risk curve. If your number puts you in the bottom 2 quintiles for your age, you have the most important actionable information you can have about your health. You are carrying a major modifiable risk factor, and you have the ability to change it. The training protocol for improving VO2 max has been extensively studied, and the findings are consistent. High-intensity interval training is the most time-efficient stimulus for VO2 max improvement. The Norwegian 4x4 protocol, 4 minutes at 90 to 95% of maximum heart rate, followed by 3 minutes of active recovery, repeated 4 times, has been validated in dozens of studies and consistently produces VO2 max improvements of 7 to 15% over 8 to 12 weeks in adults across the age range. 2 sessions per week of this protocol, combined with 3 to 5 hours of lower intensity aerobic work, produces the adaptations: increased cardiac stroke volume, improved mitochondrial density, enhanced oxygen extraction in working muscle, increased capillary density, that drive VO2 max improvement. The physiological mechanism works through 3 primary pathways. The cardiovascular pathway. Repeated high-intensity exercise causes eccentric cardiac hypertrophy, the enlargement of the left ventricle's internal chamber, increasing the volume of blood ejected with each heartbeat. Over weeks and months, this means the heart does more work per beat, allowing it to deliver more oxygen to working muscles at any given heart rate. The metabolic pathway, high-intensity exercise activates PGC-1A, the master regulator of mitochondrial biogenesis, driving the creation of new mitochondria in muscle tissue. More mitochondria means greater oxygen extraction capacity, which directly contributes to VO2 max. The vascular pathway, sustained aerobic training promotes angiogenesis, the growth of new capillaries in trained muscle, and improves the endothelial function of existing vessels, increasing the efficiency of oxygen delivery at the tissue level. These adaptations are not reserved for young people. Research consistently shows that adults in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s produce measurable and clinically significant improvements in VO2 max in response to appropriate training. The absolute gains are smaller than in younger adults. The biology of aging places real constraints on the ceiling, but the clinical significance of the improvement is, if anything, larger. A 1-met improvement in fitness produces 13 to 15% mortality risk reduction, regardless of whether it is achieved at 35 or 65. The investment in the training produces returns at any age. For people who are starting from a very low fitness base, the most important initial step is not aggressive interval training. It is establishing any consistent aerobic activity at an intensity that produces a moderate cardiovascular response. Brisk walking, easy cycling, swimming at a conversational pace. The adaptation to this level of training in previously sedentary individuals is substantial and provides a necessary foundation before higher intensity work can be safely and effectively introduced. The goal in the first 3 months is not to maximize intensity. It is to produce regular aerobic stimulus, build the habit and the baseline physiology, and create the conditions under which more demanding training can eventually be incorporated. For people who already have a moderate fitness base, the most important change is typically the deliberate addition of high-intensity interval work that they may be currently omitting. The person who walks 45 minutes per day, every day, has done more for their health than the average person. They have not done everything available to them for their VO2 max. Adding 2 sessions per week of genuinely high-intensity work, intervals on a bike, hill repeats on a run, rowing machine intervals, will produce VO2 max gains that the moderate intensity base work alone cannot produce, because the ceiling stimulus for cardiac and mitochondrial adaptation requires reaching the upper end of the aerobic intensity range. The specific protocol I recommend based on the current evidence: 2 high-intensity interval sessions per week, using the 4x4 structure, or a comparable protocol that achieves 4 to 8 minutes of total work at 90 to 95% of maximum heart rate. 3 sessions of moderate intensity aerobic work at 60 to 75% of maximum heart rate, 30 to 60 minutes each. 1 session of longer, easy-pace aerobic work, 60 to 90 minutes at genuinely easy effort, for the cardiovascular volume adaptations that moderate and high-intensity sessions do not fully provide. This structure, approximately 5 sessions, roughly 4 to 6 total hours per week, is supported by the current evidence as the minimum effective dose for meaningful and sustained VO2 max improvement in adults. The ceiling of improvement available to you depends on your current fitness level, your age, your genetic endowment for cardiovascular adaptation, and how consistently you execute the training over time. But the floor, the improvement available to virtually any person who starts from a sedentary or low fitness baseline and adds consistent structured training, is a 7 to 15% improvement over the first 12 weeks, followed by continued improvement over the subsequent months, as long as training stimulus is maintained and progressively adjusted. 7 to 15%, translating each 1 MET improvement to a 13 to 15% mortality risk reduction. The math here is not subtle. Improving your VO2 max by a modest, entirely achievable amount through training that costs you 4 to 6 hours per week is the single most powerful thing you can do for your long-term survival and health span. Nothing your physician can prescribe has a comparable effect size. Nothing available in a compounding pharmacy or a supplement store comes close. The most powerful preventive intervention in medicine is the one that is the most free, the most available, and the most systematically undertested and underprescribed in routine clinical care. Get your number. Know where you stand. Train accordingly. Track the progress. That is the entire protocol. And in a world full of expensive, complex, experimental interventions claiming to extend healthy life, The simplest and most evidence-backed path to being alive and functional at 75 is the one that starts with knowing a number your doctor has never measured.